Hi, you guys. It's Miss Burkles.
Greetings and salutations. This is Mrs. Klein.
And we are here in lesson 36. The Reformation begins. If you want to follow along, we're on page 505.
Like always, there's a guiding question, and this time it's what factors led to the weakening of the Catholic Church and the beginning of the Reformation? And we also have some vocabulary words, and they are
Denomination, indulgence, Martin Luther, Protestant, Reformation, and simony.
All right, you guys, here we go. At the height of the Renaissance, Western Europe was still Roman Catholic, but this changed with the beginning of the Reformation. This movement led to the start of many new Christian churches that broke away from the Catholic Church.
The Reformation began in the early 1500s and lasted into the 1600s. One reason for the weakening of the church was the humanism of the Renaissance.
All right, many Catholics were dismayed by the worldliness and corruption or immoral and dishonest behavior in the church. These problems led a number of Catholics to call for reform.
In this lesson, you'll learn about the factors that weakened the Roman Catholic Church and how a German priest, Martin Luther, ignited a movement that ended the religious unity of Europe.
All right, you guys, section 1, the weakening of the Catholic Church. By the late Middle Ages, two major problems were weakening the Roman Catholic Church. The first was the worldliness and corruption within the church, and the second was political conflict between the Pope and European monarchs.
Too frequently, church officials failed to live up to their role as spiritual leaders. People were also troubled by the way numerous church officials raised money to support the church. One method was the practice of selling indulgences. An indulgence is a release from punishment for sins.
All right, the church also sold offices or leadership positions, a practice called simony. Instead of being chosen based on their merit and accomplishments, buyers simply paid for their jobs.
Wow. In the Middle Ages, the Pope became a powerful political figure as well as a religious leader, and the church accumulated vast amounts of wealth.
As monarchs attempted to increase their own power, they frequently came into conflict with the Pope. In addition, popes became more involved in other political conflicts, which prompted many to question the Pope's authority and also damaged the church's reputation.
One dramatic crisis unfolded in France in 1301. When King Philip IV tried to tax the French clergy, the Pope threatened to force him out of the church. The quarrel with the king ended up under Pope Clement V. In 1309, Clement moved his headquarters from Rome to the French city of Avignon.
Think back to the map, you guys, where they you had to label that city. So now there's basically two centers of the Catholic Church, kind of. An even worse crisis developed after Pope Gregory the 11th returned the papacy to Rome in 1377. When Gregory died in 1378, an Italian was elected pope and refused to move back to Avignon. A group of cardinals, most of them French, left Rome and elected a rival pope, leading the church to have one pope in Rome and one in Avignon. So who are you going to believe?
Right. This division of the church is called the Great Schism. Section 2, early calls for reform. By the 1300s, the church was beginning to lose some of its moral and religious standing.
Reformers wanted to purify the church, not destroy it. By challenging the church's practices and teachings, however, they helped to pave the way for the dramatic changes of the Reformation.
John Wycliffe. John Wycliffe was an English scholar who challenged the church's right to money that it demanded from England. When the Great Schism began, he publicly questioned the Pope's authority and criticized indulgences and immoral behavior on the part of the clergy.
Wycliffe believed that the Bible, not the church, was the supreme source of religious authority.
John Hus was is that who you say?
Jan Hus.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Jan Hus was a priest in Bohemia, which today is the Czech Republic. Hus sought to purify the church, return it to the people, and end corruption among the clergy. He wanted both the Bible and Mass to be offered in the common language of the people instead of in Latin.
You guys remember we talked about that, the vernacular. So people want to have church services delivered to them in the language that they understand. All right, now we'll move on to Catherine of Siena. She was a mystic, which is a person deeply devoted to religion and who has spiritual experiences. She and other mystics emphasized personal experience of God more than formal observation of church practices. This approach to faith helped prepare people for the ideas of the Reformation.
Desiderius Erasmus was a humanist from Holland, a priest and devoted Catholic. He was one of the most outspoken figures in the call for reform. Erasmus wanted to reform the church from within and angrily denied that he was a Protestant who wanted to break away from the Catholic Church. His attacks on corruption in the church contributed to many people's desire to leave Catholicism.
All right, next up is Martin Luther. All right, in the early 1500s in Germany, then part of the Holy Roman Empire, a priest named Martin Luther became involved in a serious dispute with church authorities.
The church stressed that keeping the sacraments and living a good life were the keys to salvation. Luther's studies of the Bible led him to a different answer. He believed that it was impossible to earn salvation because it was a gift from God that people received in faith. People, he said, were saved by their faith, not by performing good works.
All right, Luther's views brought him into conflict with the church over indulgences. Luther was outraged because he felt that the church was selling false salvation to uneducated people. So Luther posted a list of arguments that are called theses against indulgences and church abuses on a church door in the town of Wittenberg.
He argued that the Bible, not the Pope or church leaders, was the ultimate source of religious authority. In the eyes of church leaders, Luther was attacking fundamental truths of the Catholic religion. In January 1521, Pope Leo X excommunicated him, which meant he was no longer allowed membership in the church. For a time, Luther went into hiding, but the movement he had started continued to spread.
All right, so soon he was openly organizing a new Christian denomination known as Lutheranism, which emphasized studying the Bible. Over the next 30 years, Lutherans and Catholics were often at war in Germany. These religious wars ended in 1555 with the Peace of Augsburg, a treaty that permitted each prince within the Holy Roman Empire determine the religion of his subjects.
Section 4. Other leaders of the Reformation. The movement started by Martin Luther swept across much of Europe. The printing press helped spread new ideas as well as translations of the Bible faster than ever before. Many reformers contributed to the spread of Protestantism.
All right, Huldrych Zwingli was a Catholic priest in Zurich, Switzerland. Zwingli wanted Christians to focus solely on the Bible, and he attacked the worship of relics, saints, and images. Zwingli carried his ideas to other Swiss cities.
John Calvin. In the late 1530s, John Calvin, a French humanist, established another Protestant group in Geneva, Switzerland. Calvin emphasized that salvation came only from God's grace. He said that the saved, whom God elected or chose, lived according to strict standards.
All right, moving on to King Henry VIII. In 1534, Henry formed the Church of England, also called the Anglican Church, and named himself as its supreme head. His reasons for breaking with the church were personal and political.
William Tyndale was an English priest, scholar, and writer who traveled to Germany and met Martin Luther. He attacked corruption in the Catholic Church and defended the English Reformation.
Tyndale is especially important to the Reformation because of his translations of the Bible. In the early 1600s, his work was used in the preparation of the King James or authorized version of the Bible.
All right, so for our lesson summary, we learned about the Reformation, which began in the early 1500s, and this movement led to the founding of many new Christian denominations in Europe.
All right, the weakening of the Catholic Church. By the late Middle Ages, the Catholic Church was weakened by corruption, political struggles, and humanist ideas. Many Catholics were dismayed by worldliness and immorality in the church, including the sale of indulgences and the practice of simony.
Early calls for reform. A number of Catholics began to call for reform, including John Wycliffe, Jan Hus, Catherine of Siena, and Erasmus. They questioned the practice of church leaders and some of the church's teachings.
All right, and Martin Luther breaks away from the church. In the early 1500s, German priest Martin Luther became involved in a major dispute with the church over indulgences and other practices. Excommunicated, Luther established the first Protestant church, which started the Reformation.
Other leaders of the Reformation. Other Protestant reformers began to separate from the Catholic Church. The printing press helped to spread their ideas, and Zwingli and Calvin began churches in Switzerland. William Tyndale translated the Bible into English, and Henry VIII became the supreme head of the new Church of England.
All right, you guys. So again, the guiding question for this was, what factors led to the weakening of the Catholic Church and the beginning of the Reformation?
And our vocab words are denomination, indulgence, Martin Luther, Protestant, Reformation, and simony.
All right, you the best.
Have a good one.